Is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, good afternoon. Today is April 23rd. I'm Donna Will, Professional Development Coordinator for the Developmental Disabilities Administration. We welcome you to the CCS and DDA Provider Person-Centered Plan, Frequently Asked Questions, Common Mistakes, and Different Interpretations webinar. We have several presenters from the regional offices, and that includes our directors and deputy directors. And Nick Burton is the director from Central. Kimberly Gescheidel is the director from Eastern Shore, and Onesta Duke is the director from Southern. We also have an interpreter today. She's doing ASL for one of our participants. Everyone is in listen-only mode. There are two options to listen to the webinar, and that's by computer and by phone. And if you have trouble hearing one of those, you can click on the option that works best for you. There's a handout for the webinar, and you can find it in the handout section, or you can get it by emailing me. We are recording the webinar, and we will be posting that on the DDA website. Questions can be typed in the question or chat box in the webinar panel, and we will get to those towards the end of the presentation. So now I'd like to introduce Kimberly Gescheidel. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Donna. Next slide, please.
Give me just a second.
Well, while Donna's pulling that up, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon. Happy Friday. Thank you for joining us. On behalf of the DDA and the folks we all serve, we welcome you to this webinar. We know there have been a number of webinars as we work through the DDA transformation, and we wanted to pause and get feedback from you on whether the information and guidance is making sense. We appreciate that a number of you have shared questions, and I'm going to tell you that was a total of 55 questions that we have received, and we've used those to set the stage for this discussion today. We welcome opportunities like this to come together and collaborate as a system to improve the lives of the people we support. So we're in the process of pulling our PCP data to see what we can learn from those overall numbers. And what we're finding is that approximately 37% of PCPs are coming within that 20-day time frame that we like to receive them in. So that means about 63% are being submitted after the due date and are going into auto extend. So we're hoping that this discussion, these continued opportunities to share information, that we will be increasing the numbers that we're receiving in the appropriate time frame and reducing those that are going into auto extend. So our ability to collaborate and communicate with each other vastly improves all of our services. We are each integral, not just being present, not just showing up, but being engaged in the process. And so this is like a three-legged stool. It takes all three of us, our CCSs, our providers, and DDA, to assure balance and support. And this is even more true when the floor is uneven. And as we know, sometimes trying to implement new systems and really come to understand them, it seems like things are not as level as maybe we would hope. So again, collaboration is really the most important aspect of the PCP process. It is critical to ensure that we are all on the same page. So the DDA has a very thorough PCP development and authorization process, and we want to be certain that we're providing the tools and supports you need to work together effectively and meet the needs of the people we support. You will see specific information at the end of this presentation, and as always, it is easily accessible from the DDA website. And so finally, we have a strongly shared interest in working with you in creating and implementing a system that makes sense for all of us to ensure consistent and efficient service delivery. People should get the supports and services they need and want, and providers should be paid timely for those services. So next slide, please. So what we're going to talk about, we reviewed the welcome. We're going to talk about next the tips, tricks, and for your informations at every stage of the PCP development and authorization process. So going back to those 55 questions that we received, we parceled them into these following areas so that we could make it more manageable, because we really did not want to spend the entire presentation time just answering questions. We really want for there to be dialogue. So the areas that we're going to be breaking these questions and our responses and mirror the PCP flow process. So that includes pre-planning, development, approval and authorization, PCP revisions, LTSS issues. And then we'll talk a little bit about resources and open it up for questions. So we really, really want to be sure to leave time for new discussion, along with planning for future opportunities for additional discussion. So we'd like to use this as an inaugural opportunity to have this kind of discussion with you. So at this point, we're going to move on to pre-planning, and I will turn it over to Nick. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. Hi, everybody. Happy Friday. You'll notice through past presentations regarding the PCP process that I generally like to take the pre-planning portion because I believe that it is one of the most important pieces of the PCP process. And I think it really grounds everybody and it sets the stage for how the rest of the PCP will go and the success of that process with everybody. So you'll see here on the pre-planning slide here, I have documented 90 days, roles, attendees, the review of last year's PCP, PCIS2, and the LTSS crosswalk, and then coming prepared. And really what I wanted to talk about here is, yes, those are topics, but I want to just kind of engage in a conversation about this pre-planning part. And I think all of you know, and many of you have heard me say that pre-planning is a critical aspect of the PCP process. And that should really be starting at 90 days prior to the APD date. Now, I say 90 days, and that's really when, that's kind of that definitive time period of when you start planning. But a person and their plan and the services they receive, as you all know, is an iterative conversation throughout the year. It's ongoing. But that specific planning process for the next PCP really should start at that 90-day mark. We all know that we all have a role to play on the PCP process, right? The person obviously has a role. It's their plan. They should be directing it. And that they have family. Their family is often participants and play a huge role in that process as well. We also know that the CCS, they play a huge role. They're helping facilitate and they're helping coordinate the pre-meeting or the PCP meeting or the conversations. They're gathering the documents that are necessary. They're sending the detailed service authorization to the provider. They're making sure the person believes and can see that the PCP reflects their needs and their wants. Obviously, the provider plays a huge role in this process as well. They are the chosen entity by the person to provide a service. The person, their family, the provider, the CCS, all need to be talking, communicating, sharing information, asking questions if something doesn't make sense, and working together on all aspects of the PCP. And you know, I often hear, well, we don't have certain access within LTSS to see certain things, right? Or we may or may not have been invited to a meeting, or we didn't get notified or something. And that's, again, that's that three-legged stool. We all have a vested interest in this process. And we all know when a PCP is coming due, and we all have that contact information to reach out and to collaborate about this process. And I encourage everybody to do that. The most successful PCP planning is when I see providers, CCS, and people and their family engaged from the very beginning. That's when you know you have a robust PCP, and that's when you're getting that into the regional office on time, and everybody is in agreement with what is in that PCP, down to the outcomes, down to the service authorizations. I think it's also important during this pre-planning session for agencies to start developing their PIPs. And remember, the DDA PIP form, standardized PIP form, needs to start being used for plans with a 7/1 start date. And so those should start being utilized now. And agencies can certainly attach forms that they have been using in the past, but that the PIP form in the PIP policy, the DDA PIP form, is what needs to be used starting 7/1. Agencies should be coming to the pre-planning conversations and meetings, if there is a meeting, with their cost detail, with the DSAT, updating nursing care plans or BSPs. Those are critical documents in order for the team to have a fruitful conversation. If there's changes to services, the justification tab on the cost detail needs to be completed. And that is when a provider is supporting someone in those traditional services, they need to be filling out that justification tab to make sure that it's clear what the need is for the person based on what's being requested. I think it's also important to take a look at the last year. What worked in the last year? What goals were obtained, were met? What didn't work in the last year? What are changes that need to occur in the new plan? This is also the time to talk about, you know, what does the person need this next year? What are the things we need to make sure we get into the PCP so that we're not spending most of the year doing revisions, but that we're spending the year supporting the person in achieving their goals. And that together, we're doing that together as a team. You know, I think the other piece, and there was a good question that came in regarding this about when teams are discussing outcomes and goals, it's really important to look at those community-based resources that individuals can access. Yes, we know that there are paid services, and yes, we know that some of those paid services have access to activities or opportunities within the agency, but we also want to really encourage people to access their communities and to develop relationships with non-disabled people, and to do what we all do, build friendships and identify supports in our own community. And so I think it's really important, even for those folks that are choosing to self-direct, that the team is talking and the team is working together to ensure that that PCP is what the person needs. And that all goes into good pre-planning. So now we're going to go to the next slide, and Linda's going to take over from here.
So hello, everyone. Can we have the next slide, please? Okay, I'm going to talk about the development, and we have highlighted on the slide some of the areas that we've gotten questions about. So I'm going to start with the outcomes. There's been questions related to how detailed the outcomes can be in the PCP, and I think it's important for individuals to know that there are drop-down boxes that are pretty broad in the outcomes section that the CCS is able to select for the individual. Where the details get very specific is in the PIP, and it's very important that folks follow the SMART goal way of developing their goals and outcomes. You want to give a lot of detail, ensure what steps are needed to get to that outcome, and the agency can talk about how that's going to be achieved for the person in the PIP. They want to talk about what ratios are going to be done, how the individual is going to meet those goals and move up to the next, who's going to monitor those, and how that's going to be checked on throughout the year. In the outcome section, there is also a service spot that talks about the service that's related to the outcome. In that section, it's very important that the CCS note whether this is a service that's going to continue, if it's going to increase, decrease, if it's a new service, or if they have a discontinued service, so that when we're looking at this PCP, we can determine whether these services are going to assist the individual in meeting the outcome that they have selected. The CCSs and the team need to work together to talk about what the outcomes are going to be. And then the agency itself will come up with the very specific goals that are going to be documented in the PIP. Okay, the FAE, or the focus area exploration part of the PCP, is an area that should be done prior to the PCP. And this is truly just a section that talks about different areas of an individual's life and what their wants and needs are. This is something that can be used to help develop the outcomes so that you can then have outcomes that are going to meet that goal trajectory for that person's life. Each PCP is going to cover 1 year of that person's life, but in there you should also see a trajectory towards a larger outcome for that individual's life. And you'll get a lot of that information by reading through the focus area of exploration, or the FAE. In there are things that are talking about what is important to and important for that person. So it's very important that you not only note what is important to that person, but also some things that they may not like. Somebody may not be a morning person, and getting up at 7 o'clock every morning and having coffee before they go to work may not be something they want. So that may be in there as something that they don't want or don't like. It's important that we put in there enough information that we can really identify and be able to help that person through their life and not create barriers for them. So then we have a whole bunch of questions related to service authorization. I'm going to start with transportation. There were a lot of questions about transportation. The transportation in our waiver is a standalone transportation service. This is to help an individual access their community. They can use this transportation by going to and from work. They can also use it by going into the community to do other activities such as bowling or clubs or shopping or going to medical appointments. Standalone transportation is not a service that's provided when they have a staff person that is there assisting them. Personal supports and CDS are services that include transportation as part of that service. Now, if somebody lives in a residential service and wants to take a taxi or an Uber or the bus to go do things independently, they can have standalone transportation in their budget to do those things independently. If an agency or an individual would like to contract with somebody who has an accessible vehicle as part of their transportation services, they can do that. If it is done outside of their employment, then they would do that as a standalone transportation. If it's something that's done in their employment, then the agency and that individual that they are going to be providing the transportation service with need to work out a contract that would be best suited for them. There was a question about administrative fees, and those would be included in the total transportation service. So if you have an agency that's going to be paying for your bus passes and your Uber and those kind of things, there is an administrative fee that goes with that, and that would be inclusive in your transportation request. Nursing services. We have, with our amendment, changed nursing services so that it is one service. It's nursing support services rather than the 3 separate services. So if you need nursing service and it's inclusive in that in residential or in your day program, the level of nursing service you need will be provided to you. If you need nursing services that are above and beyond the normal rates, you would submit a request to the regional office for short-term duration nursing that may include some additional nursing because there's been a change in status or additional training that may need to be done with your staff. For residential services and day services, we are putting in 1-to-1 and 2-to-1 services for individuals who need that level of care. If you have questions when it comes to completing this, please reach out to your regional offices. In residential services, there is a base allotment or shared hours that are given to each residential site. When you ask for one-on-one hours, those are truly direct support hours that are for that individual, and they are not shared hours with other individuals in that setting. When we go over to LTSS, we will no longer have the matrix score, and those shared hours that are given for the residential will be utilized in LTSS. The same thing with our day services. If there is a need for 1-to-1 services, those need to be included in the detailed service authorization area because we are no longer using the matrix whenever we go over to LTSS. There was a question about Appendix K hours for personal supports. Those hours also should be included in the direct support or the detailed service authorization so that those services can be delivered. And we want the services in the detailed service authorization to match with the services that the individual needs. there was an allotment of 30 hours given for each person that had above 28 hours of personal supports. But if they're only using 5, then it makes sense to put only 5 in addition to their normal hours. Staff ratios at one point had been listed with our outcomes and in our detailed service authorization areas. The staff ratios will now be included as the PIP unless we are talking about the 2-to-1 or 1-to-1 services. And those, like I said, are a separate line on the detailed service authorization. When we are looking through the services that have been requested by the individual, we are looking to see if there is justification for those services. Do they support the individual in reaching the outcome that they have chosen? Is this a need that is not met by something in the community or other resources that are currently available to everybody? So those justifications are very important, and they need to also be in the PCP. One of the places that you can put the justification is in the cost detail sheet. There is a page that has a justification section. If you are not doing a cost detail because all of the billing that you are currently doing is in LTSS, then you would need to make sure that somewhere in that PCP, we have justification for that service, whether it be in the outcome section or whether it be in the for shared living. We had a change in our waiver, and shared living now includes respite services as part of the service. In the past, that had been a separate service. So a lot of folks are having to do adjustments at this point to take that extra respite out of their plan because it is included with the shared living service. Okay, now job development and other employment services. When you're looking at your employment service, you need to look at the full year. You need to look at whether you are in an employed situation that's going to be supported by transportation alone, transportation and drop-in supports, or are you close to retirement and you want to spend some time in the community with CDS and some time in the day program with all of your friends that you have? Those need to be looked at and talked about with the team, and then the services need to be put into the detailed service authorization in a way that makes sense for that individual and gives flexibility for the billing. The LTSS system will not allow you to bill over the 40 hours per week of a meaningful day service, but you may need to add more than 40 hours so that you have flexibility in case you change your mind one day and decide to do 2 days of day services instead of the 4 days that you normally do. The community or the competitive integrated employment policy gives a checklist that must be completed and updated and put into the PCP. So you need to make sure that you take care of that. However, if you don't have a job and you're anticipating getting a job in the future, you can complete that form once you have secured your job and send that in so that we can then verify that it meets that definition. The HRST and risk section of the PCP is a mandatory area. On your HRST, once you've completed that, the last page gives a lot of training recommendations and suggestions. A lot of times you can pull those recommendations and suggestions and put them in the risk section, because the individual may have a choking risk, and so the staff would need to be trained on the diet and the procedures to keep that individual from choking. If there are behavior plans, you would want to include that information in the risk section. There is something in everybody's plan that is a risk. So that is a required section, and we would expect to see something in that risk section for every single person. For me, an example would be that if you do not give me coffee, I am not going to be a very happy person to deal with, and that could be listed in my risk section. Budget development. When you are developing the budgets for the individuals, it's very important that the team work together. We are currently working in 2 systems, which really can be confusing. And if you need assistance, please reach out to your regional offices. But make sure you're looking also at all of the guidance that we have put out there. The rates in and hours that are in your DSTAT are not necessarily going to match the rates and the hours in LTS or in PCIS2. You have to remember that PCIS2 utilizes the matrix score and LTSS uses shared hours, and that you really need to look at that person and see what those services are, and then put the right information on the right forms. And we have developed the cost detail sheet and the DSTAT tool, so that you can work as a team to make sure those numbers are correct. And it's very important that that's done so that whenever the plans are reviewed, we can compare the services that are being delivered to see if there are any changes, and then match that up with both systems to make sure you are paid as an agency and the individual gets the funding that they need for those supports that are being provided. If at some point you find that there are errors in PCIS2 or LTSS that you think should not be there, make sure that you're reaching out to your CCS, work through those. A lot of those issues can be worked out and fixed in the PCP. If that does not work, then you can again reach out to the regional office. Self-directed budgets are now developed in LTSS. So as you put the level of service for each of the services in, the number of units for each service, that will automatically calculate a budget in the DSTAT. That then is taken and put into the individual's person-centered budget that they determine for the rates of services for the staffing and how many hours of staffing they want to use. And that hours should match the same that was in the DSTAT. Being that there is a change in the rates that are being paid, there may be some additional funding that is left over. You don't have to use every single dollar of that funding, but it is there and allotted to that person in case there is a crisis that comes up or a need that comes up, and then they can use that funding throughout the full year. The initial PCPs. So initial PCPs are utilized for 2 things. They are used to get an individual's services ready to apply for the waiver, and they are also utilized to get an individual ready to go into funding. You have to submit an individual or an initial PCP so that you can apply to the waiver, and you can put your provider and your services in that so that everything is ready to go on July 1st. However, if you don't have a provider, but you know the services that you would like, you can put that in your initial PCP. That cannot be modified until the waiver has been approved and the effective date for your PCP has come. At that point, once the effective date and the waiver have been approved, then that will make that an active plan in LTSS. If there are adjustments that need to be done, they can be done at that point. Some of the individuals would like to start service on July 1st, but don't have their provider. But part of what you need to actually go into that service is a cost detail. So that form can be completed and submitted to your regional office so that whenever the plan becomes effective on July 1st, those modifications can be made in the PCP and the provider can be paid starting on July 1st. Okay, I know that was a lot of information. I hope that I answered a lot of the questions that came in, and I see there are a few questions in the chat box. Did we want to look at any of those at this point, or do we want to go ahead and wait till the end, panelists?
Linda, this is Nick. I think we can probably move on and then get to have some space at the end for questions. I think we'll end up with some good time at the end for questions.
Okay, great. So next we'll have Anesta.
Thank you, Linda. Okay, guys, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about the PCP approval and authorization. We did receive questions pertaining to understanding the DSA in concert with the DSAT and cost detail. And just a few reminders based on those specific questions is that the program staff, just as a reminder, that the program staff will be ensuring that all of the necessary components of the plans are completed accurately and the requested services are in alignment with our waiver. For traditional services that are currently billed through PCIS2, staff are reviewing the correlation between LTSS Maryland Detailed Service Authorization and the services in PCIS2 to ensure that services are accurately crosswalked from the LTSS Maryland system into PCIS2 where actual billing is occurring. Our program staff are checking for changes in services. They're checking for requests for add-ons, which are based on a person's matrix scores, as well as requests for dedicated hours. Staff are also reviewing the cost detail tool, the detailed service authorization tool, and all documents that are uploaded into the PCP to determine and assess need for all services that are requested. For our self-directed services participants, staff are checking to ensure that the self-directed services budget is based on the LTSS Maryland DSA, which is the detailed service authorization, and that the rates in the self-directed services budget sheet are within reasonable and customary range. It's important that the cost detail tool, in collaboration with the DSAT tool, under the traditional services model, is completed per the DDA guidance. As you may already know, the cost detail tool will be utilized to crosswalk services from LTSS Maryland Detailed Service Authorization into PCIS2 for most of our services. Being that the cost detail tool is used to facilitate billing in PCIS2, it is not required when a service billing transitions to LTSS Maryland. So At this current time, it's not required for pilot providers, people that have that are currently receiving personal support services or supported living services. When the cost detail tool is being submitted to crosswalk services into PCIS2, the justification tab addressing all pertinent questions should also be completed. I know we receive certain plans where everything is completed except for the justification tab. So we're just encouraging everyone to ensure that the justification tab is completed, because this will minimize clarification requests and aid the regional office in efficiently reviewing person-centered plans. In reference to questions pertaining to accepting service referrals within 5 days, some key things to know is that clarification requests that are made by regional office program staff often results in corrections or changes to some aspect of the PCP, including the detailed service authorization section and the PCP effective dates. When this occurs, a new service referral acceptance will be required from the provider. When a service referral is sent to the providers for their review and acceptance of the proposed services, as documented in the detailed service authorization section of the plan, it's essential that the provider is able to review and make a determination within 5 days. If there are concerns with the proposed services as it pertains to units, frequency, scope, the cost of the rates, and duration, and the provider decides to decline the service acceptance, a decline reason should be noted by the provider in the system to assist the coordinator with facilitating further discussion and a resolution to their concerns. So once the issues are resolved, the CCS will submit another service referral for the provider to review and accept. And of course, we want that review and acceptance to occur within the 5 days. Because if no action is taken, the service referral expires and will need to be resent by the coordinator. And again, all of those, if it's allowed to expire, it's going to cause a delay in the approval of the person-centered plan. We want to encourage teams to utilize the DSAT, which is a pre-planning tool, to facilitate effective communication on the service frequency and the units prior to service referrals are sent out. It'll minimize the back and forth, and it's going to prevent delays in the PCP, getting the PCP approved in a timely manner. So regarding questions about service and PCP approval, so when a PCP is approved for new or changing services that are billed in PCIS2, program staff are forwarding these changes, which are captured in the cost detail tool, to be processed by our fiscal department. Our fiscal team are also responsible for updating PCIS2 to reflect these changes. At this time, the goal is to update PCIS2 within 2 weeks of the approved person-centered plan or earlier. But of course, if there's an urgent plan that needs to be processed and needs to be updated in PCIS2, all of the regional offices are making accommodations for urgent placements. So switching from, there were some questions regarding switching from the traditional to the self-directed models. What I can say about that is that all transitions from the traditional model to the self-directed service delivery model will be facilitated via a person-centered plan. And once it is approved, the approved plan and budget will be disseminated to the program participant and the FMS. The question was more so pertaining to who is responsible for sending the plan to the FMS. In this particular case, when transitions occur and we approve the plan, again, we would forward the information to the participant and the FMS. We also received some questions pertaining to emergency requests. So there are some unique situations when a person who is new to services or currently in services needs a new service initiated immediately within 48 hours. So the DDA does allow for the revision and approval of the PCP for new or existing program participants. So for all emergency requests, we do or will require the submission of the emergency situation form, which is completed by the CCS and submitted to the regional office for our review. And finally, there were some questions pertaining to our timeline. I know everyone should be familiar with this. Once the person-centered plan is submitted to the regional office, our program staff, we do have 20 business days to review and approve the person-centered plan. There are going to be times when the plan needs to get sent back for clarification for one reason or another, which will, once the corrections are made by the coordinator and the plan is resubmitted, that 20-day time frame restarts for the regional office. And again, I would just encourage you guys to, again, utilize all the guidance that DDA has provided. There's a lot more detailed information pertaining to everything that I just stated. But again, if you have any questions, we can address that towards the end. Thank you.
All right, next slide. We're going to talk about PCP revisions. So the first thing I'll say about PCP revisions is that the DDA encourages teams to come together during the planning process each year and work together with a person to determine their needs and anticipate needs within the next year. We're all aware that emergencies are going to pop up, or that people are going to need to move or want to move, or due to unforeseen issues, a revision is going to be necessary. That is okay. What we really want, though, is to make sure that those teams are engaging in that pre-planning process and having those conversations about need and trying to anticipate those needs for the year to make sure the PCP is reflective of those. Why do I need to submit a revision? I think we just kind of talked about that. And you know, when you would submit them is really dependent upon those situations that are popping up during the year, or those emergencies that are happening during the year, or a change in need is happening during the year. When you submit the revision to the regional office has 20 days to be able to review that revision. Please, please, please make sure that when you're revising a PCP, the need is very clear and that you and the team have spent time justifying that need. So we talked earlier in many of the different topics we've talked about the justification tab on the cost detail tool. And we've also talked about just the PCP. So the risk section or the FAE, and talking about that need or the change in need or what's happened to the person to either eliminate a service or add a service or change a service. You know, we talk about all the time that the PCP really needs to tell that person's story. It's a blueprint for them and for their year. And so as things change, we want to make sure that that PCP is reflective of that change. And a reasonable person should be able to pick up the PCP and understand what change is being requested, why, and should be able to see the need for that change. And I know that sometimes there's frustration around filling out the justification tab, but it's really, really important. And if the need is crystal clear and is justified, that's going to eliminate the back and forth through clarification. New or revised services should not be provided unless there is regional approval. And Nesta just talked about emergencies. There are times where emergencies pop up and you reach out to the region and you get approval to provide a service, and then you need to submit a revision. But please remember that if a new or revised service hasn't been authorized and approved, it shouldn't be provided. And again, if there's an emergency request and it gets approved by the region, then certainly, you know, keep that documentation of approval so that you can provide those services. So I do just want to make sure that when folks are doing revisions, it's important to take a look at the effective dates and when you're making something effective and when you're determining the effective date, right? So you got to take into account that the region has 20 days to be able to review that. Again, emergency situations are different. But you also want to make sure that your effective date, particularly for those services billed in LTSS, are clear and they don't overlap, or that there's not a gap in those services, and that providers, when you're accepting that DSA or when you guys are having a conversation with the CCS, you're both very clear that there's not a gap in service and that those effective dates are correct based on what has been authorized in the PCP already. I also know that there are times where it gets really frustrating to get a revision request due to an effective date. And you know, the reasons for that sometimes, particularly I know for those of you that are in the central region, often have to do with the backlog PCP. I will say that I've seen a pretty quick turnaround on those, and I really appreciate that. And we're trying our best to try to not have to send those back for clarification to change the effective date, but there's some days that we are going to have to do that. And so we appreciate when they get turned around really quickly. But again, I just want to reiterate, the more teams can do the upfront planning and upfront anticipation of need, the less revisions that are going to have to occur during the year. And so we really encourage teams to really focus on that. But of course, you know, if a revision is necessary, certainly we understand that issues come up, and we want to work with you to make sure those get taken care of. Next slide, please. All right, everybody's favorite topic, or at least mine. So LTSS issues. I know that every single one of you have probably encountered some sort of an LTSS issue, particularly those that are providing personal supports for supported living. You may be getting the error messages in billing, either provider not authorized for service, client ineligible for service, providers exceeded the maximum for the month. And I want to talk about some of these. We can get into these topics individually. I'm going to say I don't have every LTSS issue resolution, right? Some of these we have to research, and some of these we have to go find the answer. But we're doing our best to try to get those as quickly as we possibly can. So why don't we talk about provider not authorized for service? So there's a couple things that teams and providers can do together when this issue pops up. So the first thing a provider can do is you can look to see what your DSP is clocking in under. So if a person is authorized to receive personal supports, but the DSP is clocking in under personal supports enhanced, you're going to get an error message. And so it's really important to check that. And you know, I know there's going to be mistakes. We all know that. But I've been surprised at the amount of times that is happening. So I encourage you to check it. and to check within your own agency and to remind your DSPs about that, because that often, when I get into looking in the provider portal, that's one of the issues that's popping up. The other thing to take a look at particularly is the effective date. So sometimes providers are trying to bill for a service prior to the effective date, or they may have a PCP that didn't authorize the number of services or the amount of services that the PCP should have had. So they might have 0 services authorized for them at one point in the PCP, and then the effective date, that provider can't bill for those services until a certain date. And we saw that a little bit with some effective date issues when we transitioned from PCI-S2 to LTSS. Sometimes, for one reason or another, an effective date, depending on your transition date, may have been a day or two after your region's transition date into LTSS. For some of you, it was a couple of months. And we've worked with you to resolve those issues through our PCI-S2 system, either doing a non-FPS invoice for the supported living, or for doing an error report for personal supports. But once the service is effective in LTSS, that's where that billing should occur. So sometimes those are the things that are happening. And this goes into earlier what I was talking about in regards to those effective date issues. You want to be in close communication together, provider and CCS, having a conversation to make sure there's no gap in service. It's also really important for providers to be looking in LTSS on a pretty regular basis. A, to make sure that you're authorized for the service. B, that the person you're supporting is eligible for the services. And C, that you're not exceeding the maximum hours for the month. And we'll talk about client ineligible for services and exceeding maximum hours next year. Sometimes it may come up that a client is ineligible for services. And you're all probably wondering, well, I thought people weren't supposed to be losing their Medicaid during the state of emergency, the COVID state of emergency. And you're correct. Sometimes it may be an eligibility coding issue. And that's something that we can certainly work with EDD on to get fixed. But sometimes it's just simple as that. We just got to make sure the correct code is there. Sometimes it is that somebody lost their eligibility, and that might be an error, and we just need to check in with EDD. Sometimes it might be the eligibility issue may be related to something well before the state of emergency, and it just never got taken care of. And so again, it's really important, CCS, to ensure that you're keeping up with those eligibility, but also that agencies, you're checking that. You're checking to make sure that the person you're providing a service to is eligible to receive that service. The other issue around provider exceeding maximum hours for the month, this is where that conversation and actually sitting down with the CCS and the CCS and the agency having a clear understanding about what's getting entered into the DSA and how it's getting entered into the DSA. And to really think about services when you're planning with individuals on a day-to-day basis. So what do they need day-to-day, right? So when we think about months and we think about the services, when a CCS goes in to enter what you had documented on the DSAT, depending on how many days are on the month, depending on how the weeks fall, that's going to look a little bit different than the straight, 200 units you put on the DSA, on the DSAT. And so again, it's really important as a team that you're communicating with each other about what's going in the DSA. And then if you have questions when you're accepting it, ask to see how that CCS entered that, and make sure that those hours in the GSA that you're accepting reflect the need of the person. And again, continue to check LTSS. When you're providing these services, you want to make sure that you're checking that system to make sure you're not exceeding those hours. Now, there also is issues to bring to the help desk, right? There's issues to bring to the region. And there's a lot of resources on the EVV webpage, the DDA EVV webpage, which we can talk about. But one thing I really encourage you all to do is, I think there sometimes is a knee-jerk reaction to go to the help desk, to the region, and reach out to a few people in the region. And I just want to make sure that when you reach out to the help desk, you might not hear back immediately, right? And if you've reached out to the help desk and you're not hearing back and it's been a week or two, please let us know so that we can follow up on it. Also, before reaching out to the region and just saying, hey, I'm getting this error message, why? I encourage you to look at some of these issues that we've talked about, because it's really helpful if you can identify that before coming to us, so that then we can quickly tell you, okay, hey, here's the resolution, or hey, here's the situation around that, or hey, we need to bump that to the help desk. I think the other piece of this is, and we've mentioned this in a variety of settings, we at the DDA are working on getting a troubleshooting guide out to CCS and to providers for your input and review so that we can finalize and release. But essentially what that troubleshooting guide is, hey, here are some of the issues we're encountering, and here are some of the things that we've noticed since we started using LTSS. Here's who to reach out about those. Here's how you can resolve some of these on your own, or here is the resolution, and here's who can help you resolve that. And I know that these are frustrating. And so from the provider perspective, I want to also remind folks you're getting the prospective payment, and the regions and the CCS and everyone, we want to work as fast as we can to resolve those LTSS issues. But I appreciate the patience there, and I appreciate the reaching out and being able to assist us in those troubleshooting so that we can get them resolved quickly for you. And again, I really encourage the team in the CCS to work together on those things. All right, next slide. So resources. I think the first place I want us to pull up is, and I know many of you know these exist, but I just want to talk about them a little bit more. So I want to pull up the DDA PCP webpage. And Donna, can you click on those and will they open up for you?
Yeah, let me.
Okay. So the DDA PCP webpage. So when you go to the DDA website, there's a link for PCPs, the DDA PCP webpage that has a host of information around PCP resources. So probably the most important thing on our PCP webpage is our standard operating procedure around person-centered planning. And I know that it's a lengthy document, but I really encourage you to take a look at it, as it does really answer a lot of the questions that we get within the region around the PCP process. And so again, I encourage you to look at that. The other document that I really encourage you to look at is the frequently asked questions around PCPs. It's a really helpful document. Many of you have the similar questions that many of your colleagues have had. And we try to do our best to make sure we can update those. And certainly, I think after this webinar, we'll probably have more question and answers that we can be able to add to those. The other document that I use on almost a daily basis is the guidelines for service authorization and provider billing documentation. And here's why I use it on a daily basis. It is cumbersome to open up a 375-page waiver and look at the services. And while this doesn't replace our waiver, it's a really helpful tool that kind of breaks down our waiver into a manageable guide that tells you what each service authorizes and what's included in it, and the limitations of that service, whether or not it's billed in PCIS2 or LTSS. So it's a really, really, really helpful tool, and I would really encourage you to look at it. I think also on this page, what's really important is a lot of our different planning tools and our guidance on how to facilitate team meetings and how to encourage good conversation about what a person needs and what a person wants, and the life course tools, right? You know, I know the PCP is a document and it's long and it gets frustrating, particularly when there's clarification requests. But honestly, there's a lot of fun in writing a PCP with a person. I mean, it really is telling their story, and it's showing what they need and helping them access the supports and services that they need. And so I really encourage you to look at it from that perspective. And I know you probably think I'm a nerd, but it is. It's a fun process. And I hope that you guys can still find the joy in the PCP process. The other resource I wanted to direct people to is our self-directed services, guidance, forms, and webinars. So if you click on that, if you go to our website and you go to the self-directed service tab, and then you go to the right-hand side of that tab, and you can click on self-directed services, guidance, forms, and webinars. So the DDA has invested a lot of time recently with our community partners and the folks in our self-directed services to really update these documents and budgets and forms and guidance and webinars to be more useful and helpful for people and to help guide some of these conversations. I know the other day I was having a conversation with a mom, and she had a lot of questions about self-direction, and her and I pulled up the new self-direction kind of the guidebook that was created recently, and we walked through that helped explain what self-directed services are and what an FMS is and what the roles are and the budget, right? And again, I know the budget can be tedious and cumbersome at times, but again, it's such a cool tool to be able to help a person choose what they want for their life and to help them build that for themselves and really to take ownership of their life and how they want it to look and who they want working for them and what they're going to pay them. It's really a neat process. And so I know that it can be frustrating at times, but I really encourage you to use the self-directed guidance. And again, and we get a lot of questions that's already in our guidance. And so I really want you to use that guidance because it's such a helpful tool. I use it every single day. And I'm coming from out of state, right? I moved here a year and a half ago, and I use this guidance every single day to help answer the questions that come into the regional office. So please, please use it. The other resource that I wanted to just remind you all of, and I'm sure you've all been looked at it many times, but is the guidance for operating in PCIS2 and LTSS Maryland. So look, it's confusing at times to work in two systems. particularly when one of the systems is giving you a little grief every once in a while. But I really encourage you to take the time as a team or together to look through that and look at the actual attachments for the different services and how they translate in PCIS2 and how they translate in LTSS Maryland. I can't tell you the number of meetings that I've had with a CCS and with an agency where we pulled up those tools and walked through them together. And it was like the Oprah aha moment where we all kind of got on the same page in that moment. So I really encourage you to use those. I really encourage you to take a look at it. If you need a copy of that, please reach out to your regional office. We're happy to send it. The other web page that I want to show you is the EVV web page. So if you go to our EVV web page, which Donna's on right now, if you scroll down to the bottom, there's two particular resources that I want to show you. One is for CCSs, and one is for the CCF reference guide to ISAS. That is such a helpful document for CCSs. I often pull it up, I often look it over. It's long, but it has a handy table of contents that I would encourage you to use. And then the other piece is the service modification guidelines for providers. And that's under the provider heading. And that really talks about those, when you're running into issues, those error messages around billing, once you kind of have found a resolution or you know what the issue is, how to modify that. So I think that's really important. And then finally, you know, we talked a little bit about the self-directed services already. And of course, on the DDA PCP webpage, there's the PCP checklist. And again, I know those are new, but I would really encourage you to use them. That's what's going to help you get a robust PCP submitted. And then finally, we have to use each other. We have to collaborate. The PCP does not exist without the person, the CCS, the agency, and of course us approving that. So we have to work together. We have to talk. We have to share. We have to say when we're not understanding something. We have to say if it doesn't look right, because we want to get it right. Next slide. So this is our common slide where we obviously just share with you how to reach out to the regional offices. I don't need to go over this too much, but I did want to now go to our last slide, which is our questions. And we obviously have some time for questions, which we'll start with Linda and maybe some backup from Rhonda and Patricia, because I hear there's a lot of them. But also just know, we will make sure that we get an FAQ out regarding these if we didn't answer them during the webinar. We don't want to leave anyone hanging. So with that, we can open it up for questions.
All right, Nick, the first question is for you. Can a PCP meeting be scheduled 90 days prior to the annual date?
Yeah, you have that 90-day period of time to plan and meet and get things ready for the PCP by the APD date. And when you think about that 90-day period and you got to get the PCP done into the regional office 20 days prior to the APD, yes, get a meeting scheduled.
Okay, the next question is, can providers get a list of the broad outcomes? It looks like we'll need to add the outcomes to the PIP, so we will need to know what the CCSs choose for the outcome ahead of time in order for the providers to get the PIP down ahead of time. Does anyone want to answer that?
Yeah, I can answer that. Yeah, I think this goes into, again, on those individual teams, reaching out to that CCS and having that conversation. And in engaging that. And you will also see those outcomes in the provider portal. But again, it's that reaching out and having those conversations with each other and sharing your screens or sharing the documents or printing things out or looking in the provider portal. Really kind of that collaborative process with each other to make sure everyone understands the same information.
Okay, the next question is for Kim. What is the PIP, or can you please define this term?
Sure, that's the provider implementation plan, and that's where you as the provider identify the specifics that is going to help the individual achieve the outcomes that they are identifying in their PCP. It's really a critical element, and time spent addressing this area, I think, will lead to a much better product and much better services for the individual.
Thank you. The next question is for Nick. Will the providers be able to view the FAEs on LTSS anytime soon?
Thank you. So in terms of the FAEs, and if I remember correctly, based on our conversation, oh gosh, I think that's something we are looking at right now. And in terms of a future update, and Rhonda, did you want to add anything to that? I know you've been a part of those conversations too.
Yeah, Nick, great question. We also heard that during a recent MAX meeting, and that's something that we've took note of, that request, and we'll look at that as a possibility down the road.
Okay, the next question also for Nick is DDA changing course on the development of the outcome. The presentation today, I heard that the team develops the outcome, and in the past it's been that the person developed the outcome with the support of their CCS.
So again, I don't think DDA is changing course at all. The person drives the team, and the team should be a participatory process in the development of the PCP, and all members at the direction of the person should be engaging in every aspect of the PCP process. So no change in process, no change in development, no course changing from the DDA. Person's in charge of their plan, but everybody should be a participatory process.
Okay, Anesta, who's responsible for completing the FAE?
Yes, in reference to the FAE, that particular section, there's one section that is mandatory, and that section speaks about employment, which is completed by the coordinator of community services. The team also has the option of completing all the other sections to make it a more robust plan.
The next question is for Nick. Does transportation standalone pertain to transporting to and from ...
So you got to remember, transportation is included in the budget in some of our services, and that if somebody has a need for standalone transportation to access their community, or they're independent in accessing their community or their job, that's a conversation for the team. But we do need to remember that some of our services include transportation, and as a part of that service, transportation is provided.
Also for Nick, if someone has follow-along supports, aren't they able to access transportation funding for support from the provider to get to and from their work?
So I think that really depends on the situation. Again, you need to look at our service authorization guidelines and what transportation is included in, and what the person needs, and what the person's abilities are, and what the situation is. It certainly is a conversation that the team needs to have, and they need to look at all the resources and what the service includes and what it doesn't include, and what the person's capabilities are.
This one is one of your favorite questions, Nick. What plans does DDA have to address the person-centered plans that linger in the pending review category?
It is my favorite topic of conversation. Linda, I appreciate you giving that one to me. So DDA has communicated in a variety of venues and a variety of fronts what our plan is to get the backlog taken care of and to ensure PCPs are reviewed within 20 days. So we have communicated pretty broadly that the plan is to have the backlog taken care of by July 1st. We've also communicated pretty broadly that the regions are being able to fill some of their vacant positions, which will allow for a full review team and full regional teams to be able to support those efforts. We've also pretty broadly communicated that leadership is also helping and ensure that those PCPs are getting reviewed, and that we're working closely with headquarters and each other to review data based on PCP submission and based on the rate of PCP reviews within the region to be able to address some of those issues. We're also looking at the clarifications that are going back and the high volume of them, hence why we've issued the CCS checklist to be able to address some of those issues that we're identifying, so those PCPs are coming in and can quickly be reviewed and approved and moved through the system.
I just want to add that we also have the provider checklist as well, so that the providers can make sure they have all of their pieces in there as well. And then, of course, the region also has a checklist so that they can go through the PCP and complete them in a timely manner. Our next question is for Rhonda. What is the accepted administration fee for transportation? A standard percentage? Rhonda, if you're talking, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now, Linda?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, yep, sorry about that. I think the question is related to an organized healthcare delivery system as a provider providing that service. And I would refer everybody to DDA's policy on organized healthcare delivery services, which includes information about that administrative payment. So based on the type of service, we have outlined in the policy and included attachments for that information.
Okay, thank you. The next one is also for Rhonda. Can you confirm additional nursing services are not needed for a provider agency to review an HRST for clinical review?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so providers of meaningful day services and providers of our residential services includes nursing as a component of that service, for which then they can do that HRST clinical review.
Okay, the next one's also for Rhonda. Please provide detailed guidance on nursing supports for personal supports.
Yeah, so that's another great question. And so as outlined in our approved programs, nursing support services can be authorized as a standalone service to support people who have personal supports and have delegated nursing needs. And so both personal supports and nursing support services would be indicated on the person-centered plan so that the nursing support services for those delegated tasks can be overseen and training of staff.
Okay, the next question is also for Rhonda. How are we going to know the amount of shared hours assigned per site? Are we going to receive a list, or is everything going to be listed in LTSS?
Wow, that's another great question. And so based on the question, I think we're referring to our residential services, and our residential service rates are based on the number of people in the home, and each of those equate to a number of shared hours. DDA has included this information in our guidance that Nick had shared related to the person-centered plan webpage, and it included in the service authorization and provider billing guidance and the PCP authorization and development guidance. So the specific hours that are being shared based on the number of people in the home are noted in that, and it also includes a number of hours if there are overnight supports provided.
Our next question is for Nick. When adding the DSA for Dayhab 1-to-1, if the person needs 30 hours of 1-to-1 at the day program, do we enter that as 30 hours of 1-to-1, or do we enter a base rate?
So when you are, if you have somebody who needs 1-to-1 support needs, and the team has had a conversation about what those support needs are, and you're reflecting those one-on-one support needs, you want to make sure that that's accurately reflected and determined in the PCP so that those one-on-one services can be billed and provided for.
Okay, the next question is for Kim. Can you go back and ensure that there's an understanding that the dedicated hours for 1-to-1 and 2-to-1 under community living do not include the matrix and may be different, and in some places higher than the direct support add-ons currently used in PCIS 2?
Okay, so that is quite a lengthy question. And I am going to open it to my colleagues, if anybody can jump in at this point. I mean, certainly we want to be sure that any specific dedicated hours are, adequately and appropriately addressed. What I'm not certain about is the going back question that you had, because certainly our services need to be going forward, so we don't go back. So unless I'm misunderstanding something.
This is Rhonda. Linda, do you want to talk a little bit about dedicated hours being identified based on assessed need versus the legacy matrix process?
Sure. So in our legacy matrix process, which most people are familiar with, you were given a matrix, and in that matrix, you were guaranteed a certain amount of hours that were provided for your service. And then if you needed additional hours to cover 1-to-1 service, those were added in as 1-to-1 support hours. Where this changes or is different is when you go into LTSS, we are no longer using the matrix. The individuals in a house are given shared hours. In a house with 3 individuals, there's 128 hours of service that are provided. So if you have one person in a house with that is licensed for 3, they are automatically given the 128 hours. The awake overnight services in that house are either turned on or turned off, and those services can be provided according to the provider model, whether that be a sleep overnight staff or awake overnight staff. They would have access to staff during the night. If you add another person to that house and the second person coming into that house has a behavior plan or needs to access the community independently, you would want to add some direct support hours to that individual and explain how and why those hours are needed. For example, the second person may go bowling on Tuesday night and need 3 hours to get to bowling, and the first individual in the house does not like bowling and does not go. So the second person would have 3 hours a week of 1-to-1 supports to get them to their community engagement. You may now have a third person that comes into that house. Remember, you have your 128 shared hours and you have your awake overnight turned on. The next person that comes into the house has an intense behavior program and needs one-to-one supports for every hour that they're awake, but they sleep well, so do not need a one-on-one during the night. You would then want to add one-to-one supports for the hours that that individual needs. So if they are in the house for 128 hours, that's assuming that they have a day program or meaningful day activities for 40 hours, then you would need 128 hours per week of one-to-one supports to help manage that individual's behavior program and keep that individual occupied. So it's really a case-by-case basis as you're building your services in LTSS on what that individual needs and then providing the documentation to support that need.
Thanks,
And
Linda.
Linda, can I quickly add that the provider billing and authorization guideline document, I think around on page 71, 72, has a breakdown of the shared hours, and it also goes into a lot of details regarding dedicated hours and what should be taken into account, and all of the documentation that the regional office will need to substantiate requests for dedicated supports.
Great. Thanks, Onesta and Linda, for that clarification. And I just wanted to, it's 2:30, we want to be respectful of your time. We honestly appreciate every single one of you coming. I think at one point there was 700 people on this call, so we really appreciate it. We also want to acknowledge this is probably the first of many of these conversations because I think they're important and I think we want to continue to have them. So we have over 70 questions, which we will make sure we get into an FAQ and get out to folks. But then I think we'll also check in a couple weeks to see, do we want to have an additional webinar about a specific topic related to this as an offshoot? And I think your feedback on that's going to be really helpful. But we really appreciate everything you're doing, providers, CCSs. You have a very, very hard job. And we every day talk about how wonderful you do that with such style and such grace. And even in the time of COVID, keeping everyone healthy and safe. So thank you so much. And I hope you all have a fantastic weekend.